Welcome back to the James Reeves Show. I'm James Reeves, and this is the Kyle Gass to my Jack Black, Matt Freeman.
Hola, mi amigos.
And I think this week we're going to pick back up where we left off last week, which is talking about the presidential race, the primary season.
Fantastic.
And, you know, what leads into it, the conventions and the general election.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start off with the Democrats. Now, Hillary is way up over Sanders. She's got just over a 701 delegate lead, including her superdelegates.
Yes, she does.
And I think it's interesting that there's been this sort of build-up by Sanders. You know, early in the thing, he was not going to be a threat to Hillary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all bets were off once he started winning, you know, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii. Once he started really coming back, there is a path to victory for him.
Yes.
I mean, there were all these guarantees early on both sides, you know. Oh, it's definitely going to be Clinton. It's definitely going to be Jeb. It's definitely going to be this guy, that guy. And it's not panned out so far, especially on the Republican side because, you know, Jeb's gone. That was going to be the guy. We all knew that was going to be the guy.
That's true. It seemed as if even, you know, while she was Secretary of State, people sort of assumed she was going to make another run for presidency.
Oh, yeah. We all knew she was.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the cards. But, and that's an interesting thing you bring that up, because we have to wonder how much her tenure as Secretary of State has affected her run.
Well, if you look at the numbers, and
Mm-hmm.
you talked about superdelegates
Yeah.
before. Now, for people who may not be familiar with that term, is it possible you could explain the term superdelegate?
Yeah. A superdelegate is a delegate that is not chosen in a traditional way. It is any Democratic member of the Senate, the House, Democratic governors, and what are, you know, special cases such as party leaders and such like that. And they are not held to any vote other than their own. They can choose whoever they want regardless of where the populist vote falls elsewhere. And there's quite a number of them. They can completely swing any sort of election.
That's true. Now, if you take the superdelegates out of it,
Yes.
Hillary Clinton has about a 200, 250 delegate lead.
Yes.
Easily can be caught by Bernie Sanders because there are a ton of states that have left to run primaries.
Oh, yeah. And especially one of the real big ones, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And there are polls out that are showing Sanders is starting to catch up with her, if not pass her in New York, and she needs New York. New York, losing in New York for her was like, it would be like when Rubio lost Florida.
Florida, yes.
Now, obviously, she's up enough that it won't throw her out of the race, but it could certainly hurt her momentum.
It could certainly hurt, and we need to mention, too, that superdelegates are not tied to any one candidate. They have freedom to switch their vote, which brings me to an interesting question.
Yes.
I want to pose to you, sir. Let's say we go through, and I'm not exactly sure how many more primaries we have left, but quite a few.
Yes.
Let's say Bernie Sanders wins even half of these.
Mm-hmm.
He splits them with her.
Yes.
How many of these superdelegates do you think will look at that and go, well, you know, Hillary Clinton was our choice. We started her from the beginning. We stuck with her. But this Bernie Sanders guy, he has all the momentum. He's got this rabid following. You can see that anywhere. People love the guy.
Hashtag Bernie or bust has been trending.
Like anything else on, I mean.
So there's certainly an attitude that there are going to be supporters of Bernie that if he doesn't get it, they're not voting.
They won't vote. And how many superdelegates do you think would look at this and go, well, this guy, he's got a lot of momentum. People seem to be really rabid for him. Maybe we ought to back him as well.
Well, I think there's certainly, there's going to be a number of them. Of course, we don't know how many, but there's going to be a good number of them who voted for Hillary to sort of hedge their bet behind her early on, because if she looks strong in the primary, that's going to really inspire the base to come out and vote for her in the general election. But with Sanders catching up, she could lose that, and they could go, well, we don't know. If she can't, come clearly out against Sanders, as the top dog, well, she better do it against the Republican nominee, and which could be Trump, could be Cruz, or whatever. But can she do it? Is this guy who's upsetting, coming through with a victory over a Clinton, is he the guy to go to? And I think there's going to be some who swing that way. I certainly think a number of them are going to move over because, you've got to get behind the stronger candidate. And I think Sanders is starting to prove he's stronger. He may not have the backing Hillary does, but he's got the force, the momentum, and the passion behind him.
He does, and I think it's interesting to note that Bernie Sanders, let's say he pulls off he pulls a magic trick and he gets the nomination.
Yes.
He is an avowed socialist. They would be going way left if they pick him as their nominee. Now, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is. But normally, and this is something we talked about off the air, and we'll bring it on now.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be when a candidate ran for presidency or any high-profile office, but particularly presidency.
Yes.
No matter what their views may have been, when you run, it tends to pull you back toward the center a little bit because that's where most people are.
Yes.
In this presidential election, however, it seemed like Clinton, she's not totally left, but she's left enough.
Yes.
Sanders is way left.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have guys on the right, like Cruz and Trump, who push the boundary. They're not exactly in the center.
No.
So all of these people are taking very hard stands where they are. I think it's just interesting to note that we don't really have anybody except Kasich. You want to talk about Kasich? And technically, I guess he still has a shot. He does. Technically, he has a shot.
Well, we'll come to that. There's one way through for him.
There is.
But we'll come back to that.
But it's just interesting that now you almost have to take a hard stance to get any kind of notice. This is what I am. You don't get pulled back to the center anymore. How do you feel about that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well, I think it certainly shows where candidates stand a little bit stronger. When you've got this appearance of middle ground running while you're, trying to get in the White House, then you get in the White House and you don't stand on that middle ground, you go one way or another, people start to go, well, that's not what I voted for. People tend to get upset. But I think when you've got guys like Sanders, guys like Cruz, who have been very, very clear on what they stand for, people expect that guy's going to get in there and he's not going to move. He didn't reach across the aisle. He didn't reach to get, voters who didn't believe what he believed. He tried to get everyone who believed what he did to vote. And so people, I think, feel that maybe there's something there that says when he says he's going to do that, he's going to try to do that.
Do you think the time has passed where you can be a middle of the road guy and win? Have we reached the era now where you have to take a hard stance on things?
It's hard to say that because I think there are still scenarios where a middle-of-the-road guy could actually still win this election, but I think that would be more through shenanigans and negativity more than anything. I really feel like this election in particular, I can't say for further ones or for future ones, but I will say for this cycle, it feels like everyone wants their candidate to stand for this. They wanted to say it loud. That way there's no talking out of both sides of their mouth. They can just say it. People are going to vote for what they have. People are tired of hearing politicians say, I'm for this, I'm for that, and then not backing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really part of what it is that we've had so many politicians go through Congress, through the White House, state and local, that they'll promise one thing, they get in there, and they fall into the same corruption as everyone ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
On both sides, we have a problem with this, and it has nothing to do with left or right, Republican or Democrat. It has more to do with the fact that people get in there and they fall into the money trap, and they feel they're untouchable. Well, I got voted in.
Do you think that this election?
Yes.
Okay, we'll just concentrate on this one, not future ones, but this one. Because of we might potentially have Clinton Trump, Clinton Cruz, Sanders Trump, Sanders Cruz. We're going to discount Kasich and everybody else for right now.
Yes.
For right now. And all four of these people, they take such hard stances on certain things. And, saying earlier, it seems like that's where you have to be now to get any kind of attention or momentum to get people behind you. But when it comes to the general election, do you think people taking a hard stance like they have, left and right, is that going to actually draw more voters in? Or is that going to keep more of them at home and say, you know what, I can't get behind either one of those. I'm just going to sit it out.
I certainly understand the thought process on both sides. We saw last cycle that a lot of the Republican base sat at home.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the conservatives sat at home on Romney. And certainly in this, you can see it as well. A lot of them will probably sit at home because this has been a very emotional, process.
Yes.
Particularly, it's been one thing on the Democrat side. It's been a bit back and forth, but the Republican side, it has been venomous.
Yeah, it's been wild.
And there's been, I'd back him if he became the nominee. We'd support him. And then now, almost everyone's pulling back and saying, no, if someone other than me doesn't get it, I don't know that I can back him.
Exactly. And I don't know how you're supposed to, when it comes to the general election, you would hope that your party has your back.
Yes.
They're going to stand pat. This is our guy. We're going to vote for him, and we want to make sure that he gets in. You've got some guys over on the right now. It seems as if the core of the Republican Party, they do not want. At all costs, they don't want. And namely, that would be Trump and Cruz.
Yes. Two guys leading.
It looks like they don't want anything to do with either one of them.
No. And, because, like I just said, they're both leading strong.
Yes, they are.
Kasich is a very far third.
Very
He's far enough third that he cannot possibly get the number, the 1237. He can't possibly get that now.
Which means that, and I think that's where he's hedging his bets, a contested convention.
Yes.
That's what he wants.
Now, both Trump and Cruz still have a chance.
Yes, they do.
But will they do it? And here's the thing about the contested convention. Where it was 2012, Rule 40 came out, and it had different things in it, but the main thing is the nominee has to have had a majority of delegates in at least 8 states.
That's right.
So far, we've only got one guy with that so far. That's Trump. But we've already seen guys in the committee start, some of these players in the committee wanting to change the rules that we just set the last election. They're already going, well, now it's not fair. That one guy who voted for Rand Paul, he should be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that completely throws out everyone who talks, everyone who votes for the other one. They're putting the individual over the majority in this circumstance. And there's been talk of changing the rule to where all you need is one delegate and you can be the nominee. And that would put some people back in who didn't have a chance. Rand Paul, Carson, Jeb Bush, Rubio's a big one.
Sure.
That's where Kasich is hoping to pick it up, because as it stands, he's the last man standing. Even though Rubio picked up more delegates, he's kind of suspended his campaign, Kasich's the last man standing outside of Trump and Cruz. And, the RNC does not want Trump or Cruz.
I think this goes to a bigger point. We talked about it last week about the Republican Party. We know there are reports that some Democrats have switched over during these primaries to vote for Trump.
Yes.
Now you have this situation where the RNC wants to change this rule to let anyone who has at least one delegate vote. It looks like, again, the Republican Party is saying, you know what? Your vote, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
We want to decide this.
Exactly. The top brass at the RNC is more concerned about putting who they want in than who their constituents want in. They're not worried about what the little people want.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to tell you who's best for you, whether it be Jeb, Rubio, Kasich, because those are the favorites out of who actually was in the race. Now, talks like, Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, even with the changes, and there's more changes, actually. I'll come to that in a second. But even with the changes, they still would not be eligible because they haven't got any delegates.
Mm-hmm.
However, another change they'd like to put in would be that none of the delegates are bound for the first cycle of voting, which means all the delegates Trump got, so many of them have to vote Trump in the first round of voting.
Yes.
If this passes, they don't have to vote Trump.
Mm-hmm.
They can vote whoever. And all it takes is a bit of wheeling and dealing for some of these guys to get who they need in there.
And yet again, what does that mean for the voter? Your vote didn't matter.
Exactly.
Period. It didn't matter.
You see all this call to vote, but then, you've got the small group of people who say, we get to pick.
Mm-hmm.
And then when their guy doesn't win, McCain, Romney, then it's the voters' fault.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had guys that sat out. If they would have voted, we probably would have won. Well, you know what? This year, it looks like you've got at least a couple of guys who could win the White House.
Oh, yeah. You've got two guys, both Trump and Cruz, have very passionate supporters.
Yes, they do.
Extremely. Trump from both sides of the aisle. Cruz has a really strong backing, especially by a lot of talk radio. Not all of it. There's been a lot of guys who've either come out for Trump or stayed neutral.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a strong backing behind both these guys. And the RNC is trying to just boot them both out. And what do they think is going to happen? All these passionate voters, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to have people stay at home, they're just not going to show up, or you're damn sure going to start looking at people running third party.
Mm-hmm.
You give this to Kasich. You give this to Rubio. I can't say Cruz if I think he would. I'm not sure. Trump definitely looks like he would run a third party.
And if there is no third party run by anybody,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say it's just the standard Democrat-Republican fare, you're going to have a lot of voters who say, well, my vote didn't matter in the primary. They didn't care in the convention. I'm going to vote for the opponent.
It happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
And honestly, that may not even be just on the right. If it comes really close between Hillary and Bernie, and it goes one way or another at the very end, I wouldn't be shocked to see Sanders run a third party.
Let me ask you this. Getting back to the Republicans real quick.
Yes.
Right now, Trump has the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to imagine that he's going to win quite a few more states before they get to their convention.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that going to be enough for the 1,237 votes? Probably not. Let's say when they get to the convention, he's still in the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how passionate those people are behind him.
Yes.
Just like Sanders. They're passionate for him.
Oh, yeah.
If he does not get the nomination, can the Republicans win the election?
That's hard to say. I really think it depends on who they decide. Now, let's just say they bite the bullet. Okay. Trump goes in there with the most. Cruz is a bit behind them. The RNC bites the bullet and says, okay, you know what? We really don't care for this guy, but we think Cruz is going to win. We're not gonna put in one of our guys to perform poorly. This guy was right behind Trump. We're going to put Cruz in. I think the Republicans can still win.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've got a chance. But that I would only consider that if Trump did not run third party. If Trump runs third party, you've got a strong possibility of the Democrats picking up the White House again. That being said, once again, something we did also talked about off the air, you have in this cycle a mild chance that we could see four major candidates.
Mm-hmm.
If Trump doesn't get it and he does decide to run third party, if Sanders doesn't get it and he decides to run third party, you could have four really strong candidates because, if you've got, let's say you're Sanders and you see that the Republican side is split, then you might be thinking, well, they're split, so they're not going to be as strong as they would be. I could probably pick up the vote.
Yeah.
I have a chance, whereas if it's Republican versus a split Democrat, Sanders might be thinking, well, I don't know that I could beat a full-on Republican.
And I think if that were to happen, if it's a Republican against two Democrats or a Democrat and a socialist,
yes,
I think that depends on who the Republican is. Yet again, it goes back to Trump taking Democratic voters and voting for him during some of these primaries.
Yes.
If it's Trump, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
Because he could siphon off some of those. I don't know if another Republican would be strong enough to siphon off Democratic voters. And let me ask you this too.
Yes.
Let's say in some wacky circumstance,
mm-hmm.
we do get 4 people running for president this November.
We're becoming Australia.
Who knew, right? So you got 4 people, and we're just going to assume
mm-hmm.
it's going to be Clinton, Sanders, Trump, Cruz.
Yes.
Okay. Who, in that scenario, makes out the best? Who makes out the best there?
I think if I would honestly say if I were to almost put them in probability ranking, I would say Trump, Hillary, Cruz, Sanders.
Now, why Trump first?
I think Trump, more than any of the other 3, has reached across the aisle. Hillary's not really reaching across, other than a couple people who proclaimed if their guy didn't get it, they were voting Democrat. Beyond disenchanted voters, beyond that, Trump is the main guy who's pulling Democrats and Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Behind that, you've got Clinton. I would say her because she is probably going to have more people voting. That's the name I know.
Yeah.
I'd go with Cruz next because he would, in this scenario, I'm assuming he's got the RNC backing. All the guys voting straight Republican are going to be the guys behind him.
Mm-hmm.
And Sanders, for him to be in there, he would have to also be the other third party. He's going to have the least chance because he's going to have plenty of passionate voters behind him. I just don't think there'll be enough of them.
How many of them? Exactly. And he's even said during these primaries, as long as there's a large voter turnout, he has a shot.
Yes.
Large voter turnout. He has to have a lot of people to vote for him in order to have a shot.
Even if that means lowering voting ages. And
we're looking at you, Ohio.
We just to help him win. But I think there's a lot to be said about the possibility of having 4 people out in front. That's, once again, assuming Cruz was the guy. Now, Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's Kasich. I honestly think Kasich's going to be sliding down that list.
He would be. He might finish behind Sanders.
He might, because there's just, you can see in the delegates, there's not a lot of love for Kasich.
No.
He's not picked up a lot.
He trails, as of right now, he trails a person who's not even in the contest, Rubio.
If it wasn't for Ohio, he wouldn't be a blip on the
He wouldn't
screen.
be. Ohio, and it's the only state he's won.
Yep. It's the only state. Is it? Let me double check real quick.
I'm pretty sure it's the only state he's won.
It's the only state he's won, and it's the only one of 2 where he has double-digit delegates.
So, like we said, he really wants that contested convention.
Oh yeah, because
That's
it's
his
his
shot.
only. That's his way in.
That's his shot.
But how do you justify that? You go, no one really wanted me, but the RNC. But they like me, so I might as well be the guy.
And here's the thing. Now, obviously, if you want to be president and somebody says, we want to make you our candidate, you're going to take it. But if you're Kasich, and let's just say in this instance that somehow, some way, John Kasich wins the Republican nomination for President of the United States to run for it, how does that make you feel, knowing that we're going to assume that he does not win any other states.
Okay.
We'll assume that Trump and Cruz take most of them.
Yes.
Okay. If he doesn't win a single one of them from here on out, and yet he gets the nomination, he'll take it. Obviously, he wants to be president.
Oh, yeah.
But how does that make you feel, knowing that you only won one state, you had so few delegates, and it took the party itself, not the voters, to get you there? Does that instill confidence in you?
I think, honestly, some of these guys, I don't think they need any extra confidence. The ego it takes to run for president, to say, I'm the guy who can fix it.
That's true. You got to have confidence.
And,
you gotta have some confidence.
There's actually another layer to this with the RNC, because it's even been said, Trump could walk in with enough votes. We'll still block him.
That's true. And yet again, your vote wouldn't matter.
Exactly.
Your vote doesn't matter.
Which is really starting to become the RNC mantra. I think we've seen that. Election cycle after election cycle. We don't care.
And we talked about it last week, too. Remember, Trump is the only one that we know of, really, that is getting Democratic votes.
At least in a large number.
In a large number.
What was it? 46,000 in Pennsylvania.
So, and
alone,
The Republicans, they just don't like that.
No.
They don't like it. Now, who was the other guy we talked about last week that had Democratic voters turn out for him in an election in a big way?
Yeah.
The famed Reagan Democrats. Yeah. And look what happened to Reagan. Got swept into office, I think both times.
Yeah.
I think. They can't accept their core not accepting him. They don't want to reach out. And it's not as if Trump is trying to reach out. It's not like he's saying, hey, Democrats, vote for me. It's what he's saying and what he believes, and other people are saying, you know what?
Is resonating.
He makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense.
Despite there being a concerted effort.
Majorly.
Both sides.
Both sides.
The left and the right just trying so hard to destroy him.
Yes.
So hard. Especially the news media. It is just, you've got guys on the right, one of my favorites to follow, just for the pure drama of this cycle, Glenn Beck, calling him Hitler, referring to his supporters as brown shirts.
Brown shirts.
I'm forgetting off the top of my head who he called, the guy from Breitbart, maybe? Goebbels.
Okay.
Really, really coming after him, saying, no Christian would ever vote for Trump. If you're a real Christian, you can't vote for Trump. And you've got the left who are trying to pin him down on every issue. And remember, this is a guy who's always shot from the hip.
Mm-hmm.
He says what he thinks in the moment, in the passion, says it, and he's not a politician. He's used to a press conference. He says it, boom, he's out. He's finally starting to go to these interviews. He says something. Well, let me take what you said and let's talk about it. And he's having a little bit of difficulty with that. He's just not used to answering this sort of thing, and it's tripped him up a bit. And he's getting that squeeze from both sides.
He seems to be the one candidate more than the others where it's a take it or leave it. There's no in between. With some of the other ones, you might like a little of what they're saying. Okay, maybe I can get behind that. With Trump, it's either you're with him or you're against him.
And welcome back. And we left off, and we were talking about Trump being all or nothing sort of candidate. And,
Yes, sir.
you know, a lot of people, there's a very anti-Trump on one side, and there's a very, you know, very strong pushback and passion for him. You know, I think it was Rush Limbaugh said, "You're not taking Trump supporters away from Trump. Only he can do that."
Yes. And, you know, with Trump being the kind of guy where you go, I like what he's saying in its totality,
Mm-hmm.
or I completely hate what he's saying in its totality. The other candidates, you could find some things and you go, you know what, I kind of like that. Maybe that's the person for me. Oh, I kind of like that. Maybe that's the person for me. With Trump, you either take it all or you leave it all.
Yeah.
Period. So we're going to move on from Trump just for a second. And, well, actually, it's got to do with Trump, but not specifically. The Wisconsin primary
Yes.
is this Tuesday. And the big deal with this thing
Yes.
is that apparently this primary is going to be, this is the GOP's starting point for the 100 days to defeat Donald Trump.
I love it. It's almost like a movie.
Yes.
There's this grandiose plan.
You can
to
see
bring
you can,
him
you can
down.
see these, you know, old codgers behind the curtain just rubbing their hands, going, "We'll get him now," you know.
You know the poorly lit boardroom with the very large table and everyone's sitting around it.
Very smoky.
Yes.
Very smoky. They got their little whiskey decanters out, you know.
Exactly. You know, the whole thing, it goes right back to what we're talking about. They are so much more concerned about their own opinion than their voters.
Mm-hmm.
They would do whatever it takes to stop him. They don't care if you like him.
Mm-hmm.
They want to stop him. Now, you know, obviously, Cruz and Kasich, they're going to try to stop him too, but they're in the race. And
Yes.
It's a little different for them. With this, it's just insane how much they're willing to throw it at Trump. And I love that it's an official plan. It's the 100 days.
100 days.
Man, you know, you got to wonder though, if by day, 50, if it's not working out, will they revise it, or do they have this day by day? Day 50, do they have an itinerary that says this is what we're doing on that day?
You gotta imagine, if they're going to be the well-oiled machine that they like to portray themselves as, both sides really, but if this is specifically to stop one person, they're making no bones about it.
Yeah.
There's no bones about it.
It's just,
You have to think they've got this down to a T.
yeah.
They know exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So, and I think it's interesting to note that the governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker,
Mm-hmm.
he's come out and supported Ted Cruz.
Yes.
And this leads me to ask you about endorsements.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've had a few high-profile ones. I know the ex-governor of Alaska, Sarah Palin.
Yes.
She supports Trump.
Yep.
Christie supports Trump.
Carson.
Carson is now a Trump supporter.
Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions.
Sessions is behind Trump. And you had Nikki Haley, who's governor of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
She supported Rubio. And that didn't turn out very well.
No.
So, two questions.
Yes.
Is the Scott Walker endorsement, because this primary is in his state this Tuesday, is that going to help Cruz? And I think Cruz is actually ahead in some of the polls right now. He's ahead of Trump right now.
Yes.
Does that matter to him? Does that matter to Cruz to get that endorsement? And the secondary question, I guess the overarching question would be, do endorsements matter, period? Do they matter?
Specifically to your first point, I wonder how much that's going to help. I think a lot of people who are going to support Scott Walker were probably going to be behind Cruz. I mean, that's not a guarantee, obviously. But I think there's a lot of overlap in Scott Walker and Cruz. They're both very very strong conservatives. They've both got a strong record of that nationally. So I can't think that it would change a whole lot. It certainly didn't help Trump in any way. It's not like it's a negative endorsement that Cruz is going to push away, but I just don't see it really being the game changer. Now, going to overall, certainly. I mean, a lot of people they find someone outside of a particular candidate that they latch onto, and they go, "That's that guy. He thinks like I do. He sees things like I do. Who's he voting for? Oh, he sees this in that guy. Well, I don't keep up with politics like he does. So if he likes that guy, I probably would like him too."
That's interesting. Let's take Ben Carson.
Yes.
Take Ben Carson. He has a lot of supporters.
Yes, he does.
He's no longer in the race, obviously. If you're a Ben Carson supporter, and he comes out and says, "I'm behind Trump,"
Mm-hmm.
and we know how divisive Trump can be,
Yes.
do you think that's more likely to help Trump get his voters, or are people going to say, "Ooh, he's backing Trump. I can't get behind that"?
You're certainly gonna have it go both ways. I mean, and I know some personally Ben Carson supporters who were completely devastated that he would back Trump, of all people, especially the back and forth they had. But at the same time, there are going to be people who go, "Well, I like Ben Carson. I like what he stood for. If he agrees with Trump, that's the guy he chose. Well, maybe I should look at Trump." On one level, you could look at it as respect for the opinion. I respect this guy. I respect his opinion. On the other level, you could look at it as, he's got his opinion, I've got mine. And then neither one of them's wrong, but I certainly think that with Carson backing him, he picked up something.
Where do you think the line is between, and we'll stay on that specific example.
Mm-hmm.
You're a Carson supporter.
All right.
So this was your guy. You liked what he was talking about, what he believes. That's my guy. And he backs out of the race. And now he supports Trump.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does the endorsement so strongly conflict with what you believe? Okay, you like Carson, but now he's going to back Trump. Okay, well, he's got, like you say, he's got to see something there to make him want to back him.
Yes.
At what point does that conflict with how you feel? At what point does your belief go, "No, I can't do that," or "No, I probably should listen to this guy. He sees something. Maybe I should see something."
I think it's all personal. I mean, it depends. Some people latch onto a candidate because they see themselves in that candidate, and some people latch onto one because they like that candidate's vision. And so there's certainly going to be people who are going to, going back to it, they say, wow, the headlines, Ben Carson sold his soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I said, and I know people personally who just were distraught by it. They were disappointed. But at the same time, those were people who most likely either saw themselves in Carson or really liked his vision to the point to where that was what it had to be.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's a lot of room for people who say, "I like his vision. He likes Trump." Now, they don't have the same vision, but some of it's got to be similar. If he's supporting him, I'm going to look at him too. I mean, it's a very personal, psychological thing on where you go, with, leaders.
What role do you think, when you're looking at candidates, doesn't matter what side, but whatever you believe, do you think a voter is more likely to vote for somebody that they say, "I agree with them and they're like me, they're like me"? Or are you more likely to vote for somebody that says, "You know what? I admire what they possess that I don't. They have something I don't." Let's say, and we'll go back to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The Trump's, he goes out there, he shoots from the hip.
Yes.
Well, I kind of believe that. I don't shoot from the hip. I wish I could do that. That's why I like this guy. I like what he, I like the presentation he has. How much of it is I like them, they're like me, and how much of it is I like what they're saying and they possess something I don't?
I certainly think it's a mixture because there's not an infinite number of candidates. Let's go into Trump.
Clearly.
And, shoots from the hip. We'll take that specifically. No one else does that. So if you like that, if that's important to you, you feel like, oh, he shoots from the hip, maybe he's more honest. Maybe you don't have to worry. You may think, oh, he doesn't take the time to think of a lie. He just, if that's what you like, then whether you possess it or not, you go, that's the guy. I like that about him. And at the same time, if you do possess it, you might go, well, I can relate to him. He's like me. He tells it like it is. He's saying what the American people want him to say, or he's saying what I wish I could say. So I think really it comes down to people want something similar to either their ideal self or what they currently have. And since, obviously going back to it, there are really 5 major candidates in the race right now.
Yes.
Trump, Cruz, Kasich, Clinton, Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
There's only 5. They're all vastly different. So they're going to people are going to, look for themselves in the candidates, and they're going to look for their ideal self in the candidate. And not only on that, I would also go a step further. People are going to look into attraction.
Sure.
There's I don't know. There's a study behind it. There was a loose saying by and I forget his name again for the second week. The author of Dilbert.
It happens, folks.
That Trump polls well with women who like alpha males.
Mm-hmm.
Trump clearly comes off as the stereotypical alpha male. Anyone who's attracted to that is going to be attracted to him as a candidate.
Mm-hmm. When he's in a room, all eyes go to him.
Yes.
That's the kind of guy he is. Something we talked about earlier. We talked about, it seems like more and more these days, you have to take a definitive stand on the left or the right.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few guys or gals who will stand right in the middle and say, I'm going to work with both, and this is what it is. Let's turn that to the voters.
Yes.
All right, let's go to the voters. All these candidates are going to have their backers. And some of them are going to be way left-wing, and some will be way right-wing. But I would... First question is, do you still think the majority of voters are going to be kind of in the middle? They're not going to be pulled to the polls. Polls. They're going to be in the middle. You think most of them will be?
I think so. I think because when you've got extremes like that, you still want to, for one, you're going to try to lean one way or another. You're going to look to who's closest, or one thing that's often said, especially about local politics more than national politics, a lot of people vote against and not for.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of aspects to it. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, also said, to keep quoting him, that one of the things about Trump is the way he delivers a speech. It enraptures people. There is a side of that ideology doesn't always stand with. Sometimes you can vote with someone who believes a little different from you because they inspire you, they move you.
Mm-hmm.
That is his biggest draw with a lot of people. His speeches. He doesn't have a record to run on. He's never been a politician, which is also an attraction.
Yes.
But when he talks and he says what he believes, people just get passionate about it. And Sanders the same way. He speaks. He speaks from inside and just. Sanders is not necessarily a shoot from the hip, but in general, Sanders speaks what he believes, just puts it out there, and he has caught on in such a way that inspires. One of the problems Kasich and Clinton specifically are facing is that a lot of it's the same old rhetoric that we've had for a while, and while some people still believe in that stuff. There's a whole nother, every cycle, there's a whole nother generation of voters coming in who don't have that old world connection, who, just remember growing up, this is what was said or done by their parents' generation. They think, I'm the generation that's going to do something.
Unfortunately for Clinton, Kasich, and to some extent Cruz. Unfortunately for them, when Trump and Sanders are talking, they're very dynamic, extraordinarily dynamic. So they have to work that much harder to be just as powerful as they are when they speak.
Yes.
Especially, I would argue, Kasich and Clinton.
Yeah.
There are times, and I'm not trying to dog them out here, there are times when they're talking, and I'd rather listen, to a dirty dish rag than them. They're very lifeless.
Yes.
It's the same stuff.
It's just as simple as there's no passion there. Cruz, certainly, to put him along with Trump and Sanders, he's very passionate. I think the only thing that is taking anything away from Cruz is Trump, because
unfortunately for him,
yeah, I think honestly, if Trump wasn't in this would be Cruz's time.
I do too. Yes.
I mean, this is the cycle against the establishment, and Clinton and Kasich both beautifully represent the establishment, and that's the thing. There's so much of a pushback. Now, even though Sanders and Cruz have both been politicians, a lot of their people feel like they've been on the outside. And obviously, going back to Trump never being a politician, any dealings he has with politics has been in a business sense.
That might be for some voters, that might be the only thing that's drawing them to him. He's not a politician. I admire that.
It's certainly been a factor.
Yeah.
Because like I said, this is the anti-establishment. People want to say, you never listen to us. This time you're going to have to.
And, going back to Trump and Sanders, at least in this election, you could argue it in other ones, but at least in this one, it's not enough to get on a stage and enumerate ABC. Here's what I believe. 1, 2, 3. You have to show it.
Yes.
You've got to palpably get up there and get this to the people. They've got to feel it.
Yeah.
Trump and Sanders have that in spades.
Oh, yeah.
In spades. Nobody else they don't really have that.
No. And that's the thing. It's even Cruz, for as much of a conservative darling he is, he's had some missteps early on. And while a lot of supporters of Cruz would like you to forget him, he's not always been the darling that he is now.
Let me ask you something. And is it only because he's not a politician? That's the reason I ask this. Trump. A lot of people would say during this campaign he has put his foot in it a lot.
Oh, yeah.
A lot. And it has not hurt him. Not one bit. It has not hurt him.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the way he's been sort of, we got you, it's been by established media sources. CNN, Fox News, to a slightly lesser degree, but MSNBC. These are things that have always played gotcha, and I think a lot of Trump supporters are tired of it. They're tired of the games. They just want to be heard. And what the scariest part of that is, the RNC is trying so hard to say, no, we don't care if you want to be heard. We're going to be heard.
Okay, here's another question for you then. Trump on the right is the only one who's truly an outsider in the political sense. He's never held an office, never been elected to anything.
Yes.
Do you think this would play as well on the left? If the left had somebody that had never held office?
I want to say no, really, just off gut. I think because the difference is on the right, there's a de-emphasis of government. So being outside of government, you've been in the private sector, which is what the right pushes. That's the important part. Most important part of our country, as far as any sort of jobs or that's concerned. That's the private sector. Whereas the left, there's a lot more focus on what can the government do to help people. If you don't have any experience in the government, how do you know how to help people with the government's tools?
That's a good point.
I mean, there's such a push on the left of, how can we do more for the people with the government, that if you've never been in it, what do you know? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you were in the private sector. Well, that's nice, but you don't know how to run a government job.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it kind of, how to put this? The left is very big on, business is evil.
Mm-hmm.
Businessmen are evil. Capitalism is evil.
Yes.
And yet, when someone on the left takes office, and we're going to take Obama as an example, generally, you see the government reach into a lot more things.
Yes.
And so you see the government reach into a lot more things, typically.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say the right can't do it. Of
The
course
right,
they can.
and they have.
And they have. But it's interesting that the people on the left, they harp on this. A lot of it's usually money. Money, money, money.
Yes.
It's unfair. And some of it is the quote-unquote greedy businessmen.
Yes.
They want to keep it for themselves. And yet...
Very rich versus poor.
Exactly. And at least for Sanders, I'm not very familiar with what Clinton wants to do, but at least for Sanders, he wants the free education.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to help people,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, help people. And how's he going to do that? He wants to raise taxes.
Yes.
So basically, you want to punish the greedy businessmen who are keeping all the money.
Yes.
And you want to shift that money to greedy government to have the money.
Well, I'm sure, in his eyes, it's those evil corporations. But we're the sweet, benevolent government that will cure every ill you ever have. May not work out in real life.
They want from cradle to grave.
But I'm sure that's more how he sees the sweet, innocent government that the awful GOP is trying to slay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just it's always been the thing for the left versus right. There's an ideology and there's a reality, and it doesn't always match up.
Mm-hmm.
There's this misconception that if you just take from the rich because they can afford it, who cares? Just take everything out, put them in the middle to lower class because they need to experience the terrible hardships of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd have all this money to give to everyone else, that everything would be okay, but the problem is that just creates too many issues when it comes to things like jobs creation.
Mm-hmm.
You can't build jobs from poverty. You have to have a roof somewhere.
Yes.
To start looking at, this is where job creation starts in the private sector.
They want, it seems, I could be wrong, let us know. We could be wrong. It seems like if you're on the left, you want to tear down to make equal. You want to tear down to make equal. And I'm not necessarily saying that the right is the opposite, but wouldn't you want as man to man, as a fellow human to another human, instead of saying, let's bring this down and make everything evil, I guess you could, equal, let's raise this up. Let's raise this up.
One of the fundamental differences between wealth, viewed from the left and the right, is often the idea on the left that there's only so much wealth that we've got to take from them. That's the only way to get wealth. Whereas on the right views, wealth can be created.
Mm-hmm.
We can always just, create more wealth and raise all ships equally. And I think that's sort of where it starts to clash. The view that, can we actually create wealth, or is wealth always stolen from somewhere else? And I think that's why, there's this view that on the left, the top has to be brought down, and while the bottom is raised and they have to meet in the middle, or on the right, it's, well, let's just raise everyone up.
Mm-hmm.
We can just make everyone wealthier. The businessman on the hill, the man in the valley, let's make them both wealthier. And really, I think that's where a lot of the left versus right stems from wealth.
Okay.
Views on wealth.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. And I
Yes.
don't mean to put you on the spot, but we've talked a lot today about how nowadays you kind of have to take a hard stance
Yes.
for people to, I guess, be attracted to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you were running for president,
Yes.
specifically president, and let's say you don't necessarily believe all the stuff on the right, you don't believe everything on the left, you think there is room there
Mm-hmm.
in the middle, how would you go about bridging the gap? What would you do? What would be your thing to bring as many right and left together and say, look, we can work on this. Let's work on this.
That's a tough question, because I think what attracts both sides right now is the idea of really not giving the other side what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So in trying to shake hands with both aisles, I think you're just going to be left high and dry. But as far as trying to, connect the people, I think it really will have to begin with the idea that we can't be all or none with politics. I think a problem that both sides run into is, the proverbial, I want all the cookies. Well, you can't have them all. You can have one or two. No, I want them all.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let them have it. They all should go to me. And that's the problem. And there's an ideology behind what they feel, behind them getting the cookies. They feel like their path is going to set the country in the right foot. And it's going to drive us home to where we want to be. But the problem is there's all these other people who have ideas that, may not be yours.
Mm-hmm.
They've got ideas too. Now, there is an argument to be said about what's worked and what hasn't, and trying to just keep doing the same thing over and over. But there's also a disagreement about, what has worked.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who would say, on the right, Reagan's tax cuts saved the economy. And whether it did or didn't, people on the left are going to say, well, we had a spiraling deficit at the time. Even then, they're not going to even agree on what made it work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where part of the problem starts to come in. And that's not to say that everything needs to just be, a smile and a handshake, whatever we got to do to get along, because you have to stick to your ideas, or why have them.
Yes.
But one of the problems that a lot of people are having with the establishment right now is, you've got these guys in Congress who are just, their idea of reaching across the aisle is, well, we'll just give them what they want.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted that, and that's, we'll let them have it. And next time they'll do us a solid.
Mm-hmm.
No.
That's being walked over.
The problem is you need to stop giving them everything and take something for yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a middle ground. And, people are tired of this sort of reaching across the aisle, really just meaning we'll just agree with them because it looks good.
Pretty much.
I don't think there's necessarily a problem with working with each side, because going back to a great conservative figure, Reagan, even he had to work with both sides.
Mm-hmm.
No, there's not a problem with that, but there is a problem when you too quickly agree, when you acquiesce just like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's an issue. There has to be a time when you go, okay, if you want this, we've got to get this too. If you want cuts in the military, well, there needs to be cuts in social programs too.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to come together on the concept of balancing the budget. Okay, we'll cut our sacred cow if you'll cut yours.
Wouldn't you almost run into a tit for tat, though?
Wouldn't there almost need to be? I mean, it's politics in the sense that people do keep score. People remember that when you go back home.
That is true.
Better for worse. And you can't win every battle. And you can't always have the full plate of cookies. There has to be a time when you've got to be able to look at the guy across the aisle and say, okay, you've got what you want. I've got what I want. We need to find a way that we both can agree on how they come together. And that's going to be very difficult because there are often very conflicting principles behind this. But I think there has to be somewhere where we can meet. And that sort of goes with how polarized we've become.
Mm-hmm.
The extreme left and extreme right sort of coming out. But that's not to say there can't be any sort of agreement. There needs to be something, because playing the politics of all or nothing will set you up.
Mm-hmm.
When the Republicans are riding high, when they own, if they've got the Senate, the House, and the White House, they ride high and they go, it's all or nothing for us.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the ball. Well, guess what happens? Because eventually the Democrats are going to get it back.
Tide will turn.
What happens when they come home? And you want to get upset that they always get their way?
Mm-hmm.
If you set it up, if you create an atmosphere where it's all or nothing for the winning side, don't be upset when you're on the losing side and you get nothing. There has to be this atmosphere where we've got to come together and solve a problem. We may not always agree on every aspect, but we've got to get down to this. We've got a deficit problem. How do we solve it? You've got ideas, I've got ideas. We're going to have to make this work, and it has to work in reality, not in fantasy.
Well, just remember, folks, it's okay to argue over cookies, but make sure someone brings the milk. That's all I'm asking.
And that's one of our biggest issues, I think, in this country right now, is we're running into an environment where we disagree, which is okay, but then we can't stand someone to disagree with us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's very, there's no, you're not allowed to have a differing opinion on both sides, the left and the right. Especially, we're seeing right now in the primary, we're really seeing the true colors of a lot of these guys coming out who are just anyone but Trumpers, cannot stand the idea of people voting for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
They want to shut that down because, these people don't agree with it.
Well said.
All right, and I think we're going to stop there this week. So thank you for joining us. And Mr. Freeman, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. It's been a pleasure.
All right, good night.